over 7 million different animals inhabit our planet.
Yeah, really exciting because the Eastern Bandicoot is also on French Island and Churchill Island as well. So a few different locations, and of course...
What can they teach us?
Their immune genetics were very diverse from each other. And the ones that smelled worse to them, they graded them as like, oh, that smell is awful. The researchers have discovered that the immune genetics were very similar.
Many species are in crisis and need your help. Join the movement at allcreaturespod.com.
Welcome to Our Creatures Podcast. This is Chris.
And I'm Angie.
So heading back down under. I say that every time we go back to Australia. My neighbor.
I know, Chris. I'm so excited. I'm literally smiling ear to ear right now. We love our Australian animals and our friends in Australia. Mm-hmm. This episode is definitely dedicated to the one and only Chantel.
Yes.
So we have to thank her for recommending this species and really opening my eyes up to the incredible survivors of extinction that we're going to talk about today with the Eastern Banded Bandicoot. Their conservation story is one that you will not want to miss. So thank you, Chantel, for suggesting this. You're a dear friend and a huge part of this podcast. So thank you.
Yeah, she has. She's been a great friend for quite a while, supporting the podcast through the years and now just a close friend. And we just recently did a Patreon live where she came on and she suggested the Bandicoot and their conservation story, which I'm excited to talk about because I wasn't aware of it. So that's what makes this a fun one.
Well, yeah. And for those of you that are not in Australia, you might not be familiar with the Bandicoot, and we'll describe it and of course put pictures in our show notes. But for our Australian friends, they really are an icon there. And the story of the Eastern Banded Bandicoot is really one of hope and amazing conservation efforts. So yeah, it's just going to be a really fun podcast today, learning about how bandicoots are super important for the environment. They're ecosystem engineers, and there's several species of them throughout Australia and New Guinea. So we could almost have like a 5-month period dedicated just to different Bandicoot species, which right before Chris and I went on air, I'm like, do you have it all ironed out? Because I have like 5 slides and
there's a lot.
I'm going to need your help trying to figure out the Bandicoot family. But yes, it's just, I learned a lot this week, and hopefully that'll come across on the podcast. And everybody who's not familiar with Bandicoots will fall in love with them. I learned about a video game, Crash Bandicoot.
Yep.
About it. So we'll chat about that. And it should be fun.
Yeah, I know. That's one of Pip's favorite games, and my kids play it. It's tough. It's kind of like Mario, the old Nintendo, back in the day, and is a very popular game. And it has a fun story, so we'll get there. Now, Bandicoot, when we do our research and you read this, it's actually a translation from the South Indian language of Telugu, and it means pig rat. So when you think of a bandicoot, you do think of rodents, don't you? But they're marsupial.
Yes, Chris, that's actually a good segue into describing them, because I definitely get a little bit of the rodent vibe from looking at them, except for bandicoots have a really long, pointed, almost conical or cone-shaped snout. And they definitely have depending on the species, a little bit of a rat-like tail. Some have fur on it. Some have very, very light fur. But bandicoots have these strong hind legs that are designed for jumping. They're almost like miniature kangaroo legs. I mean, they really, really are long. So they're a mismatch of everything. They're bigger than a rat, depending on the species that you're looking at. But for me, what's most striking, and for all the species of bandicoots that there are, is just this long V-shaped conical nose. I mean, they have a prominent schnoz.
Yes, they do.
Or proboscis, or that's probably the more technical science term.
That's interesting. You talk about the different sizes, because there's certain species that are smaller and then bigger, right? So the Eastern Bard, where do they fall in?
Chris, I would say they fall about in the middle, with the smallest bandicoot being the golden bandicoot, which only weighs 300 grams or 0.66 pounds. Very tiny, fit in your little hand. Yeah. Where a large bandicoot's going to be the northern brown bandicoot. And like I said, we'll focus today on the Eastern Barred Bandicoot, and they're about 4.5 pounds, 2 kilos. So bigger than a rat. I don't want to see a 5-pound rat.
No.
Running
Like a small
around
house
here.
cat. A small house cat.
Yeah, that's how.
Yeah.
That's how one of the websites described them. So, a medium size, and they're anywhere from 11 to 31 inches in length. But I do think the Eastern Barred is one of the more beautiful bandicoots. They're super cute in general with that long pointed snout.
Mm-hmm.
It's very elongated, slender. But with the Eastern Bandicoot, they have a pink nose with whiskers on their muzzle. They have prominent ears. Now, they're larger than a typical rodent ear, but definitely smaller than a rabbit. So
Right.
somewhere in between, but on the larger side, I suppose. And then the coat of the Eastern Barred Bandicoot is going to be grayish brown. It's very soft. And on its hindquarters, like from its hip back, it has these characteristic bars, which hence its name, that are pale or whitish in color. It almost looks like stripes. And then basically counter shading, because then there's also 3 to 4 dark horizontal bars to really give them this almost striped like rump appearance. Their belly is going to be light cream to whitish in color. And then the tail is about 100 millimeters in length. So there's other bandicoots that have a longer tail. And then the billibees, which is a family related to the bandicoots, which Chris will talk a lot about, they have longer tails and longer ears.
Yeah.
So the Eastern Barred Bandicoot, I'd say a medium-sized tail. Nothing too striking, but definitely not short.
Yeah, they don't look anything like the game Crash Bandicoot. Did they do that?
No, they don't. But they're
No.
super cute.
They are,
I mean,
they are.
I watch a lot of videos, especially with the Eastern Barred, because they're doing all these amazing conservation efforts in Australia and Tasmania. And so, and seeing them kind of move and hop around and just their fur and their just that long nose is just, it's very, very iconic. It's a nose that everyone should love.
Yeah. They are adorable. It's because there are 20 species, and we didn't, we're focusing on the Eastern Barred, but we are trying to cover general knowledge about bandicoots because, this applies to a lot of them. So the bilbies are, like Angie said, they're close cousins, just longer ears,
pretty
and whatnot.
Cute too.
Yeah, they are very cute. So the short-nosed bandicoots is from the subfamily Isodons, and then the long-nosed bandicoots are the parameles. So the living species of the paramels or parameles, however you say it, is the Western Barred Bandicoot, which are doing okay. It's the Eastern Barred Bandicoots that were extinct in the wild and are coming back. And then you had the long-nosed Bandicoot. Then there was the Desert Bandicoot, which is probably extinct. And then you also have the pig-footed Bandicoot, which is probably extinct now too.
That one hasn't been seen for I think
quite a while.
20s. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's some others in New Guinea.
And I don't mean 2020s.
No, I know.
1920s.
Yeah.
I'm so old. I actually have to say that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. But in the 20th century, a couple species went extinct. Where a lot of these species live, a lot of them live in New Guinea, and then a lot live in Australia. So the striped or giant bandicoots live in New Guinea, and then you have the long-nosed northern brown, southern brown, western barred, eastern barred, and even more living in Australia. And then you did have a subspecies of eastern barred living in Tasmania. So when the Eastern Barred went extinct on the mainland, there was only a few left in Tasmania. So that's where we find these species, these marsupials. Now, why care, Angie? It's whenever I go to Australia, a couple years ago, we had those horrific fires, and we have given some updates where I think that's in the feeling I got reading this story about the Eastern Barred Bandicoots and conservation in Australia. That really woke up the populace there, the 20 plus million people that live in Australia, wanting to protect their wildlife, wanting to protect their backyards, their habitat. I really got a feeling like since those fires, and maybe I can talk more about Chantel when I talk to her one-on-one again, or during one of our Patreon lives, because she came on. I'd like to talk to her maybe next month when we do that again. We can ask her, what's the feeling there in Australia about conserving your native wildlife? Because I feel like they are caring, right? Like, why care about a bandicoot?
I mean, besides it's so darling.
Yes, always. That's always the answer. That's always our default. It's always.
It's just really unique. I know we'll talk about it in evolution too. It's an ancient creature. Obviously, there's lots of marsupials down in Australia, but the bandicoot plays a really important role as an ecosystem engineer. And the way that they do this is the bandicoot with that long nose, they're looking for insects. So they're omnivores, and we'll talk a lot about their nutrition, but they're always looking for beetles and grubs, lots of invertebrates in the soil. And when they are nosing around for their dinner and snacks, they basically turn over or act as a natural till for all the leaves in the soil on the ground, which is really important for twofold reasons. Number one, it helps things grow, right? Every farmer knows that. Till the soil, mix it up, helps things grow. But number two is this tilling, bringing up some of the damp soil and the damp leaves, reduces dry spots in areas throughout the forest floor or wherever they're living, which can act as fuel for fires. And so the less dry spots there are, the less fuel there is during fire season. So it adds a huge benefit to the forest or to the habitat that they're living in. And then they also spread spores of several different species of fungus around. And man, Chris and I are not cool enough to talk about plants, let alone fungus. I wish we were. I wish we were. But it's like, even when we do invertebrates or even fish and stuff like that, it's like, man, I got to stay in my lane and do these mammals. But in general, everybody should love the fungus among us because they act as decomposers in the forest, and they're really important. And I just did not give them enough credit there. So, and I apologize to any expert out there. The bandicoots do a great job. They're really important. And they also eat a lot of these bugs and grubs and beetles that can also harm crops and fields for farmers. So they act as a way to keep the insect load down in areas where insects aren't necessarily wanted. So just really, really, really important. And I think it's so incredible that Australia is working so hard to bring the Eastern Barred Bandicoot back from being extinct in the wild. So yeah, it's just, I mean, they're really important.
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about that till in the soil. I mean, we didn't even. I was just thinking of the fires, and then you're right. If these animals are a check to possibly that, less things to burn, but every species has their niche, and here's one that not other species can fill it. They just can't fill it, and so there's going to be a whole catastrophic up and down effect, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, when you think of their nose, they actually look. I mean, that's how a tiller is, right? Like, if you're, I mean, of course, a lot of farmers are now using tractors at till and stuff like that. But if there is a hand till that a layperson like myself might have for the garden, it kind of looks like their little nose. So that's what they're doing. It's amazing. Yeah,
one of the descriptions I saw was like calling them like an elephant shrew. Which is a species we should cover at some point.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, there's so much out there, but yes. And
I know.
And I was reading, you can always tell if you have a bandicoot in your yard, if you live in Australia, because they leave like little holes in the dirt. And that's the sign that they were there looking for insects the night before, which would be so cool. So if you're from Australia, send photos if you have bandicoot holes in your yard. I would love to see that.
Yeah. Well, and then taking how, across the board, a lot of bandicoot populations are way down to when they were before Europeans arrived in Australia, obviously, but through conservation efforts, populations are increasing. And that is especially true of the Eastern Barred, like we've talked about. So this was a species that was extinct in the wild. In 1989, there was fewer than 150 of Eastern Barred Bandicoots left. And then in 2013, they were completely extinct in the wild. Now, Zoos Victoria had, in collaboration with conservation organizations there in Australia, but mainly Zoos Victoria, had these emergency population. And then just really quickly, Zoos Victoria is a conglomerate of zoos. So you have the Melbourne Zoo, which is down where Chantel lives. You have the Werribee Open Range Zoo and the Healesville Sanctuary. So there's zoos in Victoria in Australia.
Yes, and there's a lot of NGOs and also the University of Melbourne. There's a lot of collaboration in these conservation groups that really worked their butts off for the past 30 years or so, right?
Yeah.
To bring the Eastern Barred Bandicoot back from pretty much functional extinction.
Yeah. They're completely extinct in the wild, and these zoos had the Eastern Barred Bandicoots under their care as this emergency population. And the Eastern Bars went extinct. They a lot of it was not only habitat loss, predators, so foxes. We've talked about this before in Australia and like here in New Zealand. So introduced feral cats, very bad, and a lot of overgrazing of the eastern gray kangaroos. So a lot of their native grasslands where the Eastern Barred lived. Now, bandicoots can live in all sorts of different environments, deserts, swamps, forests, but the Eastern Barred primarily was these native grasslands in Australia. And so they went extinct in the wild.
And so Zoos Victoria and their collaborators basically were able to get 19 to 23 founders that were brought under human care in the 1990s, the last known wild populations of them anywhere. And for the past, 30 years, a multi-million-dollar campaign in collaboration to start this captive breeding program of the Eastern Barred Bandicoots and then start rewilding them. It's just incredible. I have goosebumps right now. Their estimated population now is about 1,500.
Yeah. It's like the black-footed ferrets.
Yes.
There's stories we've talked about where, they were extinct in the wild, and zoos were able to, in the United States, keep these emergency populations and learn how to breed them and breed them. And now they're out back in the wild. You worked on some of that stuff. When you were at Lincoln Park Zoo, you had friends working on those projects. So,
yes. Yeah. Still, one of my dear friends is still always going out to the Colorado to work with the black-footed ferrets. Dr. Rachel Santemeyer, we had her on the episode. Boy, that was earlier on. She was one of my friends. I was like, please come on my podcast. She was amazing. She's still my mentor. We talk all the time. And she has me working on another side ferret project for her. Don't you worry. This is very similar. But for Australia, this was like an incredible first because the Eastern Barred Bandicoot went from being extinct in the wild to now being considered endangered. So it's just a really moving story, and we're simplifying it in like this 2 to 3 minute segment,
right.
And it really deserves a lot more time because it is such an accomplishment. And my hats go off to all these people that collaborated for over 30 years and are figuring out all the different aspects of it, because sometimes some of the locations they put them in earlier on, it didn't really work very well. And so now they have these reintroduction programs and populations on Phillip Island. And that's where the little blue penguin populations are.
Yep.
I forget which episode that is, but we covered them not too long ago.
Yeah.
So go back in the queue a little bit and check out.
You're making me jump. Episode 22 was with Dr. Rachel Santemeyer.
Okay.
So there you go. And then the little blue penguins were episode 262. So we
write
just
those
had
numbers
them
down, unless you're driving.
22.
And then definitely don't scroll while you're driving either through the whatever podcast app you use. But yeah, really exciting because the Eastern Barred Bandicoot is also on French Island and Churchill island as well. So a few different locations. And of course, they're very careful where they release them. They're usually in predator-free areas that don't have the foxes. A lot of them are fenced in, and they monitor the population. And because of using science and genetics and stud books and trying to maintain the most genetic diversity when you're only dealing with 23 individuals or 19 or whatever the starting number was, you have to be very, very careful that the population doesn't become too inbred. And they've done a great job with this with the Eastern Barred Bandicoot because the captive program has positive growth rates and basically close to 96% of genetic diversity between individuals. And Zoo Australia and their collaborators have done an amazing job with the captive breeding program because they have positive growth rates. Obviously, if they're going to go from like 20 individuals to 1,500, and they have 95.6% of wild source gene diversity retained. So they're keeping them genetically diverse and keeping the genes similar to what they would be in the wild.
Yeah.
And they are back in the wild. And so it was really exciting for me as a scientist doing a little bit of research about Eastern Barred Bandicoots, because when I opened up their PubMed or Google Scholar searches, just looking to see what's been done, since 2018, there was just several articles published. I'm going to talk about one in reproduction because, you know me, I love reproduction.
Yeah.
But just several ones about the recovery of the mainland subspecies of the Eastern Bandicoot, predicting suitable release sites for assisted colonizations, a case study comparing the population ecology of the Eastern Barred Bandicoot on different island reintroductions. What I'm trying to say in a very unorganized way, which I apologize for, is that I think the Eastern Barred Bandicoot is an example of leading the way in reintroduction research. I would say, and this might be naive, and so if there's a researcher out there, I apologize, but 30, 40 years ago, we weren't talking about reintroduction research. When I was an undergrad, that was not a major. I probably would have picked that as a major. I picked zoology and then animal science later on for grad school. But scientists and zoos and NGOs and conservation groups are really trying to figure out not only the best way to save species from extinctions when they are under human care through captive breeding programs, maintaining genetic diversity, which is not easy. But then also, okay, how do we reintroduce them and how do we get better at it? And that's the thing with science is like they've made mistakes in the program as far as maybe releasing them in an area where, they didn't get the return rates. They didn't do well in that area. But they're learning how to do it, and they're using science. They're not using guesswork, and they're reporting their science. So another species in peril in New Guinea or in the United States or anywhere can potentially use the Eastern Barred Bandicoot methodology and help the species that they're trying to reintroduce. So I'm just really excited about this reintroduction research, as you can tell.
No,
Sorry to dork out about it, but it was
no.
It's
something. It's been a theme lately.
We do this every week, and sometimes you go to like Google Scholar and look for a species, and there's literally like something from like a paper from like 1934.
Yeah, I know, I know.
And that's good. I mean, it's good. It's still good data. They did good science, back in the day, but it was just very hopeful for me as they're not only reintroducing the Eastern Barred Bandicoot so they can live free in the wild where they should be, being the ecosystem engineers, but that they're also learning how to do it better, and they're sharing that in a scientific way. So
it's been
way to go, Australia. I love you.
It's been kind of a topic in our podcast lately because we did that with the lynx. I think it was the lynx we did over Christmas. We talked a little bit about that we were episode 257, December 1st of last year. We talked a little bit about reintroduction, and then when we went and did crows, which was episode 269. Because I'm looking at, on my slide, Hawaiian crows. We talked about they reintroduced them in the wild, but they failed, and they brought them back in under human care. And we were talking about this reintroduction, science, like you were talking about. It's so important. It's so important.
Yeah, and the paper, if you stick with us, the paper I'm going to talk about towards the end of the podcast during reproduction is even more science on how Eastern Barred Bandicoots select mates. And maybe we should give them more choices, because when we give them more choices, the data is showing us that they have more offspring, and the offspring has more survivorship. So yeah, I mean, I just love to see the data and in ways that are helping these animals. It's really exciting.
And then just to kind of wrap this all up, Angie, I other animals that were extinct in the wild, I was thinking about this because the Eastern Barred just had such a great story. So Hawaiian crow, go listen to that crow episode. We've gotten a lot of great feedback on that one too. People are just blown away about how intelligent they are.
Like, I never look at a crow the same after listening to that podcast.
I know.
Me neither.
Yeah, episode 269. The scimitar horned oryx. I know that was one we wanted to look at. There's only, they're extinct in the wild, but there's about 1,800 left in zoos and protected parks. Okay. So that's
I got to work with the Arabian oryx. So
yes. Yep.
They have
very
a
similar.
huge place in my heart.
Yeah. And then there's the pear David's deer, once only held in zoos. Now they're being reintroduced in Asia. The Spix's macaw, that was a very interesting one, because I just saw in the last few weeks that they're reintroducing them in Brazil. I think I mentioned it to you a couple weeks ago about a bird.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe we should
cover an article or something.
Yeah, wasn't it like they're on that coastal range? I think.
Where the golden lion tamarin.
Yeah, we were just talking about that. So they're being reintroduced, and then Wyoming toad and some others. So zoos are really doing an important job. So Zoos Victoria, hats off to you. This is why Angie and I, talk about what you do all the time, because we really believe in this mission of saving these endangered animals and then reintroducing them. So fascinating stuff. Now, shifting gears, evolution, we've done marsupials, but again, I'll kind of go through it because it's always so fascinating, marsupials.
They're cool. They're so ancient.
They are. And they started in the Americas, and then they made it their way to Australia. It just blows the mind. So marsupials are mammals. Okay, so we have over 5,500 species of mammals. Then when you get into infraclass, because mammals are a class, the infraclass marsupialae, there's 334 species. 70% live in Australia and nearby, like in New Guinea, which tree kangaroos, one we got to do too, I know soon. 30% live in South.
Tree kangaroos yet?
No, I know. I was telling Pip yesterday, I'm like, we got to do this one, because we were watching a show. I was doing my research on marsupials, and I was like, we're going to do that one.
Oh, we're
going to do that one.
John can come on, and they have them at his zoo.
Yeah. Yep. So then 30% of marsupials live in South America, 13 species in Central America, and then 1 species in North America, north of Mexico, which is our very own Virginia opossum, or opossums, that's episode 169. Very, very fun. Now, bandicoots in the marsupials, the order is Paramelemorphia. So this is the bandicoots and bilbies, and there's only 22 species. So, no order you see depends on the animal we're talking about. You can have thousands of species, or like here, 22. The family is Paramelidae, and this is the 20 species of bandicoots. Now, within the families, the subfamilies, there's 3 subfamilies, and I've already talked about the short-nosed bandicoots. There's 3 species. The long-nosed bandicoots, 3 species. Then the next subfamily is the New Guinea long-nosed bandicoots. There's 2 species. And then the final subfamily, there's a new one now, which I'll talk about here in a second, the Crash. But the other subfamily is the New Guinea spiny bandicoots, mouse bandicoots, and then the Serum bandicoots, which lives on an island in Indonesia. So New Guinea has, 13 of the 20 species, and then 6 or 7 in Australia. Again, 2, the pig-nosed and the desert bandicoots, are believed to be extinct. Were also from Australia. Now, what I love about the marsupial story is how they originated in the Americas so long ago. So the earliest mammal we know was like 200 million years ago, was a shrew, and then survived through dinosaurs for 140 million years somehow. And about 125 million years ago is when marsupials split from these early mammal ancestors and went from the Americas through Antarctica up into Australia. In this,
it's incredible.
I know, this Gondwana.
100 million years.
Yeah, because Antarctica didn't become covered in ice until about 35 million years ago. So the placental mammals never had a chance to make it over to Australia because they might have been in Antarctica, but by the time they couldn't make it to Australia because, like they said, the ship had already sailed. The land bridge was long gone, and now Australia was migrating north. Now, the closest relatives to bandicoots we know are the bilbies, and then also you have the wallabies. So there's a whole bunch of wallabies that we can talk about, but just such a fascinating family of mammals. All of these.
Well, and it's probably
marsupials.
because I'm from the U.S. and not as familiar with all the different mammals that live in Australia. But I just love this week learning all about bilbies, and I know of wallabies, but still, I just didn't realize how many different species there were of bandicoots. And yes, lots to cover for sure.
There is. I mean, we have possums, not opossums, but possums. I want to cover because they're such a menace here in New Zealand, but they're an amazing species in Australia, where they belong, or some of the islands in Indonesia and New Guinea. Rat kangaroos, little ones, and one we've got to cover maybe soon is a sugar glider because we've been on this flying kick.
Oh, yeah.
So there's so many fascinating marsupials. It's awesome. It's awesome.
I know. We should make this our full-time job, Chris.
We're getting there. We have some big developments coming that we'll announce in the next few weeks. All right, bandicoots. The oldest fossil we have is around 25 million years. So you're right. This is a survivor. This is a species that has been around for a long, long time. Now, I mentioned Crash Bandicoot, and I guess it's a good one to kind of bring up here because we didn't really talk about why care, where the Crash Bandicoot. There is a extinct species of bandicoot that is named Crash, but they discovered it in 2014. It's around 15 million years old. They named it Crash because of the video game. And really quick before we jump into physiology, where Crash Bandicoot, it's kind of a fun little history. Sony Entertainment was developing this video game in the 90s. And you had Sonic the Hedgehog, you had Mario Brothers, all these other games. And so they wanted kind of to have Donkey Kong. That was another one. They wanted to have an animal themed video game. And so they got this game company developing a game for them. And they started it. And it wasn't Crash Bandicoot. It was Willy the Wombat.
I didn't know that.
Yes, that's what's fun. It was Willy the Wombat was going to be the video game, and as the game evolved, as they were developing it, as it was crashing into, because in the game you go in and you destroy things like walls, or not walls, like boxes and things. I played a little bit of it on the PlayStation, and Willy the Wombat just didn't make sense, so they named it Crash Bandicoot. Now, we know wombats are pretty amazing with their butts, and they can crush. They covered that. That's a fun episode. It was episode 255. You've got to go back and listen to wombats. They are amazing creatures. So Crash Bandicoot became, part of our popular culture, especially in video games. So this species that they found, they named it after the video game. The video game wasn't named after it. It was named after the video game.
Good clarification.
Yeah,
Got it.
Yeah. There you go. All right. So that's kind of, the gist of it. We've covered marsupials again, and we're going to cover them again in the future, obviously, because so many fun ones to cover. Angie, just physiology wasn't a ton. I know the repro is a big part of it. Things I found, the bandicoots sadly only live 2 to 3 years in the wild. They don't survive very long. That's pretty common for marsupials. Some of the things I found interesting is they do have sharp claws because they are diggers. So similar to a species we just covered very recently, the pouch is rear facing, right? So
yes, the pouch is rear facing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's similar to the wombat, right? Because I remember that in the wombat. I found that interesting.
Yeah, it seems backwards, but it works, and then they're not in there that long either, like kangaroos with the upward facing pouch. So, yeah.
But it's because when they're digging, right? They don't want to kick all that dirt into their pouch.
And they dig a lot. They're definitely, they have sharp claws in the front and in the hind feet. They do most of the digging, I think, with their front claws to help form that perfectly snout-sized hole to snuff around in. And bandicoots have a very well-developed sense of smell to help them locate all the different invertebrates that they're eating. But Chris, I was also reading about the fact that bandicoots, along with having a good sense of smell, which is really important, and that big nose of theirs, they also have highly sensitive nerves that researchers think are used to help them detect movement as the prey, the little grubs or other invertebrates, wiggle around under the soil.
Oh, very adaptive to their environment.
Really, yeah.
Well, I don't know if you saw this, but they're fast. They're very fast. 15 miles per hour or 24 kilometers per hour.
Yeah, bandicoots can even jump a meter at a time. So they have almost a weird looking gait. It's I call it a gallop, but it's not like a gallop like a horse. But it's interesting. And if you watch some of the videos, they almost hop like an inchworm because they have really long hind feet that look almost like kangaroo legs. And so they hop along like an inchworm when they're just at like cruising speed. But when they need to, those long legs can make them pivot and run pretty darn fast to escape a predator. So I didn't see any of that on video, probably because it happens so fast and they're nocturnal. So it's hard to see. But they can get away. But when they're just lumbering around, they look kind of silly. It's and I guess it's somewhat similar to how the Crash Bandicoot moved in the video game.
Yeah. You kind of like spin around. Yeah.
And like a little. So, but they're fun. They're fun to watch move. I really enjoy it, and especially with the Eastern Bard because they have those bars on their rump that they're just darling.
Yeah, they are. Well, before we get to what they eat, like you mentioned predators, before Europeans got there and brought all these introduced species, dingoes, snakes, large birds, owls would pick them off.
Eagles.
But then the introduction of foxes, feral cats, wild dogs has really hit them hard. And then, like we talked in I believe it was the wombat episode, we talked about rabbits, some of these invasive species, but rabbits are a potential threat to them because they're in direct competition with food. And then you have the Eastern gray kangaroo populations booming because of, man-made deforestation things going on there. So I don't know. There's this whole perfect storm, I think, that really knocked that Eastern Bandicoot population down to where they went extinct in the wild. But fortunately, Zoos Victoria and others have worked hard to save them. Really quick before we jump to repro, what's interesting about bandicoots, Angie's already talked about some of that, insects. So the omnivores, they do eat plants, but they do like insects, spiders, eggs, reptiles, but do like, plant matter, roots, seeds, berries, things like that. So it's going to depend on the species of bandicoot that you run into and what's in the region, what's available. But general omnivores, so that's what they eat.
Yeah, and I was reading if food is really scarce, depending on where they live, they'll even eat scorpions.
Oh, yeah.
There's another reason of why care, right?
Yeah, there you go. Get some of those scorpions. But, they're fun, right? I mean, what's some of the fun behaviors that you found with them?
Well, with Eastern Barred Bandicoots, in their diet, a study showed that they like berries. So,
Okay.
It's kind of fun to think of them eating anywhere, things from like grubs to beetles to vegetation to berries. So, and with a little side of scorpion.
Yep.
Yeah, really, really adaptable. And depending on what's around, which is awesome. But in general, the bandicoots are nocturnal. So they're going to emerge at dusk, and they're going to basically just start foraging for food. That's what they do all night long. And it's a lot of work digging those little holes and snuffing around for any prey items and or foraging, once again, depending on the food source and the time of year. And so during the day, they're going to rest. And bandicoots will tend to rest in nests.
Mm-hmm.
And these nests, once again, depending on the species and depending on where they live, are usually not much more than just like a little shallow depression in the ground. They'll put some grass over top of it and just hang out in their nest. The bandicoots are not social. They're very solitary. They only come together during breeding. And so in a nest, you're only going to find one bandicoot or maybe a mom with her babies before they're weaned. And bandicoots are super happy just to rest in their nest throughout the day, and they are not going to come out unless they are threatened, and then that's when they'll run from a predator at pretty high speeds. The home range for bandicoots in general is pretty large considering how small they are. For males, it's going to be about 100 acres or about 40 hectares. And for females, it's going to be about 75 acres or 30 hectares. So their territories do overlap some, but that's a pretty good region to cover, looking for food throughout the nighttime.
Well, one of my most favorite behaviors that we've covered with the marsupial is the quokka, and the myth that, because I can see it coming up every now and then on different videos and posts and stuff on Instagram or other social media, how the female like expels the baby when it's being chased. It's just because I was watching a sequence on this marsupial. It's Animals on Netflix. It's very fascinating, where a gray kangaroo is being chased by a dingo and the baby falls out. And I'm like, oh, it's like a quokka. But we dispelled that myth, right? It's just the muscle contraction. She doesn't purposely drop her baby like, here, eat this thing.
Correct. Yes, it's just the cortisol from trying to get away from a predator.
From a predator. Poor quokkas. Oh, they're so cute.
And it may work towards her advantage to get away, but yes, she's not actively.
Oh, I got to get over to Western Australia and
throwing your child in front of a dingo.
This poor thing. Oh,
they're so cute though.
Oh, the quokkas are the best. That's an amazing episode. That was episode 194, Cute Quirky Quokkas. I highly, highly suggest that one. But there's some fascinating stuff with the bandicoots in repro. And one fact I found jaw-dropping, which I know you're going to talk about here in a second. So what's unique about them?
Oh, yeah, Chris, there's definitely some fun facts about bandicoot reproduction. But there's also several things that aren't really reported because they're nocturnal. And so with the breeding behavior, there's not a ton known about how they behave in the wild. But for instance, when a male and female do come together to breed, there's a courtship behavior that's been reported in long-nosed bandicoots, where that basically pretty simple. The male will go around and smell the female, and he'll follow her for a couple hours, basically. And I guess if she likes him, then they will copulate. And so this only lasts for a couple seconds, and then they're back to being solitary. They go their own ways. And so I would presume that for other bandicoots, it's probably similar, with a very reduced and almost boring, if you will, courtship behavior, courtship behaviors. However, what is not boring, and it does need to be mentioned here. So if there's small children listening, I am going to be talking about the male reproductive anatomy really quick. Like most marsupials, the male bandicoot, including the Eastern Barred Bandicoot, does have a bifurcated penis.
That reminds me of the echidna. That's one species we got to cover again too, because they have 4? So,
yes.
Yeah.
And so by bifurcated, this is just 2.
2. Yeah.
But yes, it's very, very unique and very ancient. As we don't see that in more modern day, placenta mammals. So pretty cool stuff.
Well, and the reasoning is, if you're going back, and maybe it's a relic in some, is they had 2 uteri or 2 cervix. It has to do with the male anatomy matching up with the female anatomy to produce offspring. So that's why you have either 2 or 4, depending on the species. But there's more, right? There's more. There's more fascinating facts with this. Marsupials are amazing.
Yeah, probably the one that blew me out of my chair and just, I had so much fun with was their gestation period. So male and female bandicoot come together. They breed, fertilization takes place. The gestation period for the bandicoot in general is, drumroll, 12 days.
That's what blew me away. What?
12 days.
That's insane. I mean, rabbits are at least 2 months, right? 60 days. Is that right?
Well, Chris, you actually bring up a really good point. I have a little quiz for you.
Oh, no.
So a rabbit, days.
Oh, I messed up on rabbits. It could be as low as 30 days, right?
And 28 to 35.
Yeah, cats are 2 months. Cats are 60 days. Okay.
What's going to be
elephant? 22 months. I'm done.
Very good. There is one other animal that is known for a very short gestation period of about 12 to 13 days.
You said animal or mammal?
Mammal.
Okay, something like flies. It's 2 days. 12 days? 12 days is nothing. That is... And the only reason I know with marsupials can do it, I know you're going to cover it, is because they're so underdeveloped. So it's got to be the bilby. It's got to be another marsupial.
North America.
Oh, possums? Is it 12 days? Was it 12
the
days?
Virginia possum, 12 to 13. Okay.
Wow.
So maybe a little bit longer, but yes.
We'll have to find that episode. That was a long time ago.
Yes.
We did that.
For my quiz of other animals that have very short gestation periods, which animal has the next shortest? A squirrel, a rabbit, a mouse, or a hamster?
Oof. Okay, we just established rabbits at 60 days or 30 days. Mice, I would think mice are very underdeveloped. I'm sure hamsters are very underdeveloped. What was the other one?
I forgot.
Okay, whatever.
I think it's a squirrel.
Yeah, squirrels are up there too. They're pretty underdeveloped, but I would imagine they're probably a little bit longer.
Yeah, they're 30 to 40 days, so they're actually a little bit more than rabbit. And the mouse is going to be, depending on the species, 19 to 21.
Yeah, they're pretty short.
The hamster is going to be 16 to 23.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I mean the pinkies, they're so underdeveloped with mom, and so they nest and keep them in there and they nurse, but that's quick. 12 days, 12 days.
Very
That's
brief.
It's you breed within 2 weeks, you have a baby on the ground. That's not on the ground. I mean, with the marsupial in the pouch.
Yeah. And what's also really unique about the bandicoot family is that their embryos form a placenta.
Yeah.
So
what's going on?
They're so silly. This is not seen in other marsupials except koalas and wombats do a little bit too. And the placenta is not super developed. It lacks chorionic villi and other layers that are found in more developed mammal placentas. But yeah, they still have one that connects to the uterine wall. And
Why didn't we cover this in repro? Like when I taught graduate level reproduction in animals, like I talked a little bit about marsupials, but not a lot. Like there is so much we could study in these animals and learn.
Yeah, it's super fascinating.
Oh, it's crazy.
Well, it's like they were testing things out. Like, how many penises do we want? Do we want placentas or don't we?
Yeah.
Should we be pregnant for, a small period of time and have underdeveloped babies? And and
survival of the fittest. It's like what they all crawl in the fur and they all have to latch on to a teat or you're done.
Yeah.
Oh, the marsupials are nuts. They're nuts.
Fun. They're so fun.
Yeah, they are fun. They are fun.
And so as far as like a breeding season, in Tasmania, bandicoots are going to be born between late May and December. So
it's pretty big.
Yeah. And with the Eastern Barred Bandicoot, the females do have 8 nipples, but she typically produces a maximum of 5 young in a litter with an average of 2 to 3. So in general with bandicoots, I think a common litter size is 3 to 4. Now, what's really fascinating is because of this short gestation period, a female can produce anywhere from 3 to 4 litters during a breeding season. So if we take the Eastern Barred Bandicoot as an example with her reproductive capacity, one female can produce basically up to 16 young in a breeding season. So, their ability theoretically to rebound with some of these populations that are in crisis is theoretically good. Now, as Chris mentioned, being born pretty undeveloped, you are at some disadvantages, right? So their juvenile or infant/juvenile mortality rate is, pretty high. So,
well, and to take this full circle, when you talked about reintroduction science, we can produce and under human care produce a lot of Eastern Barred Bandicoots, but they're putting them in predator-free areas because if we go and just drop them everywhere, the predators are going to go have a heyday. And we found that out. Again, this is all tying up with this podcast. If you keep following us week by week, all these stories are interchangeable. The Hawaiian crow, the reason the Hawaiian crow is not doing well is because they're getting picked off by the predators. They go out and put a few out, hoping they can establish themselves, establish ranges, rear chicks, all of this, and they're getting picked off by the predators because there's so few of them. So it's just challenging. That reintroduction science, that's a really great point. We really need to focus more on that.
Yeah, we should look for like a specialist or maybe a round table would be really interesting to talk about.
More of it.
The roles of, breeding animals under human care and then the science behind actually reintroducing them. And it's so fascinating. So, and obviously we need more of it as we move forward with all these species in crisis.
Absolutely.
So,
yep.
But so back to bandicoots though,
Yep.
The pups are going to be weaned around day 55 and they do hang out in the mom's nest till they're about 86 days old. So they'll forage with her and kind of learn a little bit of the ropes. And then they're off on their own and they mature pretty fast. And they'll be breeding around 6 months old. So if there's no predators around, they are able to potentially rebound pretty quickly. However, that did lead me to one of the papers that I mentioned earlier on the podcast about trying to learn more of how to get these numbers up, how to get the offspring. If theoretically, if an Eastern Barred Bandicoot can have 16 offspring per season, how do we get most of those 16 to survive?
Mm-hmm.
And yes, the predator-proof fencing is definitely helpful, but overall, just having a fitness is really important. And so, researchers were noticing that not as many Eastern Barred Bandicoots were making it as they should. And so they started to investigate kind of this theory known as mate choice, as far as letting the female help select the male that she feels will help increase her offspring's fitness.
Yeah.
I'm not really saying that right because it's not about feelings. It's actually more about olfactory senses.
It is. It is.
And Chris and I are huge fans of mate choice. Chris probably even more so than myself. He's a super, super mate choice dork.
Dork,
which is one of the
very
reasons
much.
why I love him.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just the more research we're doing about it, the more we're finding out that it's really important, evolutionarily speaking, for females to basically have some kind of selection in who they want to breed with, and that's and that mimics what they would do in the wild. And when they're living under human care and in some of these breeding programs, they don't always get that because the researchers and the zoologists are trying to put them together with a certain male that they want them to breed with, because our data shows that this male is the most genetically diverse from you, and so therefore you should breed with him. And of course, they will end up breeding, but their offspring may not actually be as fit as they potentially could be. So
I'm itching.
I know. So
you can see me on camera.
I know.
I love this topic.
It's just so fascinating.
Yeah.
And the research has shown that there's tons of different cues about why we like mates. If you think about peacock, it's going to be visual. So there's behavior in there, and there's some physiology and some morphology. But a lot of it does boil down to sensory triggers, olfactory being one of them.
Well, can I explain it?
You can
definitely. I want to jump in because you brought it up. And I do. I love talking about this one.
And we promise I will get back to the actual paper about Eastern Banded Bandicoot mate choice.
I'll make it quick, Angie. I'm sorry.
No,
I'm sorry to butt in.
I'm sorry to
drink
my tea. I love this.
Okay. So I delved into this because this goes back to Richard Dawkins again. The interview we talked about, looking at cloning the mammoth, and I talked about I was looking at certain genetics, MHCs, blah blah blah. That's why I think they needed me on that project, because I was looking at doing work with.
They do need you on that project, buddy. They do.
Endangered Somali wild ass. So it got me down this whole thing on immune genetics, and then it led me into mate choice. And I boil it down because I love teaching this in my classes. All of us who are adults and we're dating and trying to attract mates or whatever, we know certain people we've been around smell worse to us than others. Certain people smell really good. Their natural body odors, whatever, really smell good to us, but some others, they smell really awful. And the way I used to always explain this to my students is like my siblings smell awful to me. They just do.
Your poor siblings.
I know. I love them. But they just do, because they've boiled it down to immune genetics. We're very similar genetically. So the smell has come in to where, we obviously don't want to have babies with our siblings because the genetics would be too similar. So they've done a lot of trials with this where they had, women or men wear t-shirts at night, and somebody in the lab would go, not knowing who was who, A, B, C, D, E, they would go and assign a score to the smell on the shirts. And the ones that smelled the best to them, they would go and look at their immune genetics, and they discovered that their immune genetics were very diverse from each other. And the ones that smelled worse to them, they graded them, was like, oh, that smell is awful. The researchers have discovered that the immune genetics were very similar. And they've done this. We've done this in ungulates. We've done this in some like big cats and bears. Now they're doing this in barred bandicoots, I guess, to see.
Yeah. Well, And so actually great for bringing all that up. And the immune genetic.
And just to tie all this up, and so it basically what they're finding is this major histocompatibility complex. And you want diverse immune genes in your offspring so they can withstand diseases, parasites, other things better. So I was looking at it as a standpoint of pregnancy, trying to find compatible genes for pregnancy. That's where I go back, way back to the cloning and all that stuff. But in these populations that Angie's talking about, I guess in Eastern Bandicoot, and Angie will fill us in on the paper, is you don't want similar genetics, so that's where mate choice comes in. If you'd allowed them to select their mates, generally they're going to select somebody with immune genes that are different from them through smell without even knowing, right? Without even knowing.
And that's the thing too, is I'm not a geneticist, but I do think that just looking at, okay, this one is less related because it's its cousin's cousin.
Mm-hmm.
Is one way to look at genetics. And that's why we got to get a stud bookkeeper on here to talk about some of that, on how zoos typically try to talk about relatedness as far as when they're trying to make some of these pairs to maximize genetic diversity, which is really important, obviously. But I do think that it's like a little bit different than the diversity of your immune genetics or your major histocompatibility factors. So by letting the animal have access, by letting a female have access to a couple different males that are genetically diverse from them, maybe one a little bit less than the other one, but if you let her pick, there might be the ability to improve offspring outcomes. And so this hadn't really been tested before in marsupials. The only example that I could find was there was a test in the agile Antechinus. I'm saying that so wrong. I had to Google it. It's a species of marsupial that's small and a carnivore. It's found in Australia. So sorry for all my Australian fans. I'm sure I'm not saying that right. Agile Antechinus. I don't know. Anyhow, so there was a study on those guys with mate choice years ago in 2007, and it was found to potentially improve offspring outcomes and reduce inbreeding. But in 2018, researchers in the Eastern Banded Bandicoot took it a step further. They wanted to give females that were in this captive breeding program and the recovery and release program the ability to select her male. And what they found is that when they gave the females their mate choice, basically by letting her smell different males and recording which male she spent the most time around over a multi-day period. And then, because it's science, then also selecting the male she didn't spend that much time with. So I guess choice B, and then going through and looking at her litter and how her litters performed, the researchers found that by allowing a female to have an opportunity to choose a mate and spend more time with him and pick one over the other, it improved her reproductive outcomes in the conservation breeding program. And so the researchers surmise that this might be really beneficial when you can apply it, right? Sometimes there's maybe just not enough males or they live too far away. But basically the females that were paired with males that they preferred compared to males that they didn't prefer, they were significantly more likely to produce young. And then preferred pairings also resulted in earlier conception of young than being with choice B. So for the long term, this could really potentially help improve their numbers, which is what they're, what is the ultimate goal of the Eastern Bandicoot breeding and recovery and reintroduction programs. Awesome. Yay!
Yeah,
Science
I know.
For the win.
I love science. Love it. Love mate choice too. Oh yeah, I could have dorked on that for forever. It's just such a fascinating topic, and and I think it's because we can all apply it in our own lives. I look back at my own, any of us in our history, and it's like, I mean, I love my siblings to death, but yeah, they say, sorry, you guys stink, leave me alone.
I'm gonna like see my siblings in a couple weeks, and I'm gonna sniff them, and they're gonna be like, "What are you doing, you weirdo?" Because I always do weird things, anyways. So, I'll be like, "Well, so Chris says."
Yeah.
So stay tuned. I'll report back if they stink or not. So,
Well, I mean, looking at conservation, bandicoots, the eastern's endangered, barred, the western barred's vulnerable. There are some that are, least concern. Like you mentioned, the northern brown bandicoot's least concern. The spiny bandicoot, so a few of the species in New Guinea are endangered, on some of the islands there. So, across the board, not doing that great. They really aren't. So, we got to keep fighting for them. Australia, keep doing what you're doing. Zoos Victoria and all the universities down there and people like Chantel and others. I know we have a lot of fans down here near me across the Tasman Sea. So thank you for what you're doing for all your animals there. So what are some of the things we can do to help bandicoots, Angie?
Well, yeah, for all of our friends in Australia, Tasmania, New Guinea, or wherever bandicoots live, there's several things that you can do to help. Have a nice lawn that has lots of plants with native vegetation. A lot of bandicoots like dense shrubbery because that's where they'll hide and nest down during the day under cover. So if you have shrubbery of native vegetation, that's awesome. This is one of my favorites. Have a compost bin. My compost bin right now in Florida is rocking. It is wild. It's so wild. I took a video of the worms because I'm that big of a dork. And I might post it on social media. So I'll put a disclaimer, like if you're sensitive. But I love it. Like every day, John and I were such dorks. We're like, did you see the worms today? Oh my gosh, I fed them watermelon. They're going crazy.
That's nice.
But yes, the compost bins help because they, of course, attract a lot of worms, and bandicoots can eat the worms. Having a worm farm is also great, not only for your soil in your yard, but also for bandicoots. And really anything that basically creates an environment that's rich in soil invertebrates. So happy soils, happy invertebrates mean happy bandicoots. Definitely keep your cats in, your dogs in at nighttime, and yeah, just keep those bushes or let your grass grow, especially if it's your backyard or something where maybe, a lot of people don't see it. Let that grass grow dense and thick and just make it a nice little home for bandicoots. And then if you get up in the morning and you see those little holes where their snouts were digging for food, send us a picture because that would make me really happy.
Yes. Well, yeah, I mean, we especially for our friends, again, in Australia, those are great tips. Now, who are we highlighting this week that are out there doing the hard work?
Well, Chris, we definitely have to highlight this week Zoos Victoria for their recovery and collaboration and reintroduction of the Eastern Barred Bandicoot, saving it from extinction. It's just incredible. And so Zoos Victoria has partnered with all these different organizations, and they played a huge role in saving the species since 1991. Zoos Victoria has bred more than 650 bandicoots. And of course, they're reintroducing them into these 3 different locations with predator-free fences, predator exclusion fences. So they're just doing a lot, and they're following the science, and they're working together, multi-million-dollar campaigns. Like I said, it's a lot of collaboration, and it's super impressive. And it's the stuff that gets me really, really excited about why we need to care and support our local zoos that are accredited and doing this kind of work. And so if you go to www.zoo.org.au, you can learn a lot more about Zoo Victoria and what they're doing to help basically save the Eastern Barred Bandicoot and, of course, several other species. Ways that you can help as a listener, just increase people's awareness about bandicoots, and especially this conservation story about the Eastern Barred Bandicoot. You can also visit your zoo. By visiting your zoo, you're helping support their research efforts and all these collaborations and helping them fight for these animals to live and not be extinct. If you can donate, that's great. There's a master conservation plan for the Eastern Bandicoot that was started in 2019 and it goes until 2024. And so if you go to zoo.org.au/donate, there's more information about that because money donated helps keep this program thriving and helps keep the population of Eastern Bandicoots rebounding as they've done for the past 30 years. So if you'd like to get involved and you live locally, learn about conservation efforts, not necessarily at zoos, but even locally where you live, whether it's a nature center or local gardeners, community gardens. Yeah, just take action for local wildlife in general, because your local wildlife is very unique and they have a story to tell, and you should help fight for them. And so we can help share it and they can continue to live in the wild.
Yeah, no, it reminds me of just that recent interview I had with Thomas Reelstone. We talk about New Zealand, and he at the end, he really talks about that, like wherever you are in the world, conservation starts in your own backyard, and
100%.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then you can branch out and, help animals around the world. But great point. Just to tie all this up, we've mentioned some previous episodes, from Down Under, other marsupials. Going way back, episode 59, Tasmanian Devils. That was a fun one. Like, they're just they have an amazing conservation story.
Yeah, that's a fun one.
Especially with the virus they were dealing with and how they've relocated them to islands to save them. Then talk about reintroductions on the mainland in Australia. So that's a fun episode. Episode 93, koalas. A lot of, that's very iconic. Everybody's favorite. Episode 136, red kangaroos. And then all the other ones that we've already mentioned, like episode 169 was opossum, the one there in North America. So lots of stuff for you to listen to if you want to learn more about marsupials and the amazing species down here at this end of the world. But Angie, you brought your A game today. Thank you. It was awesome.
Thank you, everyone, for listening and supporting wildlife and conservation. Please share this episode. And thank you, Bandicoots.
Listen, learn, share. Join the movement at allcreaturespod.com.